Hello and welcome to the video where we discuss stage 2 ever at the end of time. Basically in this video we're going to be talking about each track in stage 2 and then stage 3 and so on. This is Saturn, he's going to join me.
Oh, hello guys.
Alright, so we're going to start with C1. Now C1 is pretty depressing, lower mood compared to pretty much anything from stage 1. The static is definitely rampant throughout the track, and you can definitely feel something somber in it. And the track goes on for a little while, but I do think that's important to understand that this is where we are now, and the point of denial is no longer something that everyone can go along with. And the track title is interesting because it makes me think that the patient is aware of what's going on. They know that whatever's happening, it's only going to get worse, and that's why it's a losing battle. But they're just trying to recall as many memories as they can, as it's the beginning of the end. What do you think?
Well, so basically, kind of like what you said, first, before I kind of discuss it, just to say C1 is arguably one of my favorite tracks in kind of the whole album in stage 2. I just like the static. I loved it, and it even sounds good reversed, but that's not the point. The point that it's the true beginning of the end, not like stage 1 just giving you a warning. This is a true warning. This is saying you're going to go through like the 5 stages of grief or something like that. It's really a depressing state to be in because they refuse to have dementia, even though it's more clear for their family members or other people to see that they have it, and the symptoms are more clear, and they still refuse to accept it as old age. But I don't know if they also believe it at the same time because everything's gradually getting worse over time. This stage isn't really distorting or anything. The stage is more like on this stage is basically more of a depressing stage, last actual happy memory stage before they go to very depressing, very joyful, active stage 3.
Yeah, and I hear a lot about the stage being about the 5 stages of grief, but another thing is that some tracks will go from denial and back and forth, and I find that pretty interesting. Like, sometimes they'll believe it, other times they'll keep trying to deny it, and I find C1 a very interesting track because it really does show you that things are going to be different from now on, and it's no longer about the glory days. So next we have C2, Misplaced in Time. This is one of my favorite tracks, if not my favorite in the entire album. And the reason is, just like C1, it feels depressing, but in a different way. It has such a large amount of gloom, and yet it's a coherent track, arguably more so than C1. And I think this is important because while the patient is still they still are fully aware of what's happening, that's not the problem. The problem is that they know what's to come, and that makes it hard for them. Occasionally the track will sound a little happy for a few seconds, and I find that also interesting. It's a wonderful track, and the title I really like too. Misplaced in Time could mean 2 things. It could be referring to the clock test dementia patients take, where if they fail, like the time being misplaced, then that's a sign that they might have dementia. And this could be like the diagnosis, which I believe. Or it could just be that you're feeling misplaced, and they don't know, and they can't really recall which memory from the next, at least a few small ones at this point. There's that happy part I talked about. That's why I love this track so much. What do you think of it?
Well, in my conclusion to this track, to Misplaced in Time, very good track. I really loved it back then. It always play in my head. Whenever I heard it, it'd be stuck in my head for the whole day. I don't know why. It sounds very sad. Like, I don't think this happens to you, but it happens to me. Whenever it's sunny outside, even though I don't go outside, I just have a happy mood. When it's cloudy or rainy outside, it's not that I'm not happy, it's just it feels more sad and gloomy for some reason. That reminds me of it. And to me, Misplaced in Time it's probably not right for the thing, but I think it might mean like, I'm pretty sure it might mean like you say, you know how, because dementia patients get confused, like they can misplace things.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it means. They forget stuff. Could forget time. They misplace stuff. That could be a thing, but I'm not sure. But all I know is it's a very good track, but very sad. And the meaning, even though we don't know it yet, I'm pretty sure it's also really sad.
Yeah, the interpretations only make it better. So next we have another famous track, C3, What Doesn't Matter How My Heart Breaks. Now this track is important because it uses the same song as A1, which is, of course, the most famous track in the album, which is It's Just a Burning Memory. It uses the same sample, Heartaches, but it uses a different singer, Seger Alice, which he's used quite often here. And the fact that this song only uses a certain portion of it, and it just drags out the melody, it sounds so much more sadder than the original song, because it's no longer about recollection. It's trying to hold on to a memory that you care deeply about. And the title is not only a lyric from Heartaches, What Doesn't Matter How My Heart Breaks, but it's almost as if the patient is saying, what does it matter how I feel if no matter what, I'm going to forget this? And another way I like to think about it is that this track coming after C2 is them trying to go back to a favorite memory. What do you think?
Well, so, I think that C3, like you said, is more sadder because you can hear it's very pitched down. It's kind of pitched down than you hear the original sample. Like the original sample, it's pitched down, but this is more pitched down. It's more slower, of course. This is like the same time what you expect. But it's not just that. What doesn't matter how my heart breaks was also a lyric in Digger Ellison Alboys, because even though there was some different words and maybe some different music at the same time in both of the samples, at one point they had the same lyrics. What doesn't matter how my heart breaks, and I believe it's because Alboys original, which probably meant he loved someone but is over him or something because he got upset or someone betrayed him or something. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure what matter how my heart breaks, like it breaks your heart. Maybe the C, maybe other people think you have dementia when you really think you have it, or you think you don't have it, and because you think you just have a refusal to accept it. So basically, their heart breaks because everybody thinks they have it, maybe because they're slowly losing memories over time.
Yeah. So next we have C4, Glimpses of Hope in Trying Times. This track stands out because it's one of 3 in Stage 2 that uses Paul Whitman's Grand Canyon Suite. Overall, that's a very good piece of music if you have the time. And this track, despite the title, sounds really ominous and depressing, but in a different way. It sounds more terrifying, although I'm not really sure how to put it. The title suggests that you're trying to find something happy in all this despair, and yet you still hear this such an ominous sounding song. While it isn't one of my favorites, it is certainly interesting to think about, and I'm still trying to figure out why the title would be like that. What do you think?
Well, to me, it's because Glimpses of Hope of Trying Times, when I first heard it, it kind of sounds like maybe the beginning of a horror movie or a dramatic movie or something.
Definitely.
It sounds kind of like a soundtrack to it, but more of an old horror movie, maybe in the 70s or 80s, in the beginning of a track, like going camping or something, or in the forest. Like that kind of sounds like a more Friday the 13th kind of sound, but it's not. And Glimpses of Hope in Trying Times probably means you're trying to find happy. You're trying to find hope that you're gonna be okay and maybe everybody else is okay.
Yeah.
And you're trying so hard, but all you see is maybe glimpses of hope, which very rarely probably happens in the dementia patients or hope.
That's definitely a good way to put it. So next we have C5, Surrendering to Despair. And fun fact about this track, it's actually the longest in the entire album if we're not counting Post-Awareness. There's a certain footstep sound pretty soon through it, and overall, it is one of the most depressing songs. This isn't the end of the denial, but this is truly the point where they've accepted it. Even if the patient doesn't let other people know that they've accepted it, they definitely have at this point. That makes it one of the saddest tracks for me. Seriously. What do you think?
Well, to my opinion, surrendering to despair probably means that you, instead of maybe having refusal to accept that and you try harder to memories, you surrender to despair. You're like, it's kind of like, it's not over yet, but it's half. You're getting kind of closer. You just surrender to depression and despair. Really sad. And also, when you said the footsteps, I think everybody says that, but to me, I feel like it was just like a crackle or maybe something that just happened, and it sounds like, I always thought it was just a little crackle for like 5 to 7 seconds, I think, and it always and I thought it was just maybe a little crackle, maybe the start to other crackling. I'm not sure, but you could kind of, in surrendering to despair, you can kind of, when the static starts to go on, like, when there's that short pause, maybe a half between the song, and then it goes to the other half of the song where it doesn't have that like that part, like at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
There's more static, and it kind of reminds me of the C1 static.
Yeah, kinda. I hear a lot of people compare the two. So next we have D3, I Still Feel As Though I Am Me. Now, this is another track that doesn't loop, and I think that's a good thing because it starts off like this, just complete... What did you say? What did you say?
You mean D1?
Yeah, sorry. Anyways, so D1, the title is interesting because even though they've accepted it for themselves, at least I think after C5, they're still trying to convince others by the title, I Still Feel As Though I Am Me. You can hear something faint on the background, and as the track continues on, it goes on from this pure emptiness or void to a violin, and it's honestly kind of chilling. The sample is Sunrise by Paul Whitman, and although I don't really talk about the samples a lot, this one I feel is pretty important, because who knows, maybe at the time of day it takes place during the sunrise. What do you think?
Like what you said, it's either a violin or fiddle, and it always sounded funny to me. But I feel like the first emptiness is probably after you're surrendering to despair, even though it's in the original sample. There's a few silent, like 60 or 40 seconds of silence. It's like still, it's I feel like it's after, like, when you surrender to despair, you still feel as though you are yourself, but you feel something different, and then that's why there's emptiness, and then finally you can kind of not go back to normal, but finally go back to maybe a tiny bit of peace in music.
Yeah. So next we have D2, Quiet Dust Coming Early. Another very depressing track. The way it has a somber mood doesn't really remind me of Denial, but rather, well, I'm not really sure how to put it. I picture a ship sinking and the crew playing this for the last time, but obviously that's not really that dimensional. To associate it with the album, though, it just feels like maybe at the time of day that they're just reflecting on everything that's happening. And this quiet dust that's coming early might not be a literal dust, but maybe a dust of hope and how it's ending soon, and they feel this depression, even if they are aware. There isn't much static here, which I think is interesting, because they're still aware, just like in, say, C2, but it's still a very somber mood. What do you think?
I think it's a good track to start off. it's not, no, not so, wait, I'm sorry, I got confused. It's a good track, but it's like, long-term dust glimpses. I kind of compare it to that, but they're totally two different samples and two different melodies. I kind of compare it to quiet dusk coming early, like a dusk coming early, and like you can't really maybe understand it.
Yeah.
And then maybe the difference with long-term dust glimpses, it's just it's long term, and then there's like maybe a cloud of dust, maybe your mind, or just dust, and you glimpse it. I'm not sure. The music is pretty good, but it's not my favorite.
Yeah.
Also, I'm gonna leave the call real quick and join back in like a second.
Okay. So next we have 20 D3 Last Moments of Pure Recall. This track isn't for nearly as depressing as some of the other tracks, but there is some sense of melancholy. You're still pretty aware in this one, but there is still that sense of denial. You feel almost like you've accepted it. You're not exactly happy, but you're enjoying these last moments of pure recall because they are really gonna be some of the last moments. You'll still have memories a little while after this, but this is the last time it'll ever be as pure as it is. So that's why the track feels melancholy, but at the same time, acceptance and a little bit of happiness in it. And that makes it one of my favorite tracks in the entire album. What do you think?
This is actually another one of my favorite tracks in the album. I loved it a lot. It just sounds like happy. It's just a happy moment before you go back to the abyss of sadness, despair, maybe, and go to stage 3, and not the last track, but it's getting closer and closer to the end before you know it will be. It's the last moments of pure recall and lucidity.
Definitely. So next we have D4 Denial Unraveling. I hear people say this track is terrifying, and while I thought that was a little strange at first, since it doesn't really sound terrifying at first, I kind of understand it. You can hear it right now, but the first part of the song just sounds so heavy and reminds me of C2 a little, but then you have the part that sounds like singing. The way the track masterfully goes back between gloom and denial is wonderful because while the denial is almost gone at this point, the way it's unraveling, as the title suggests, it really makes me think that they're not rather going back to the denial, but still trying to hold on to the feeling that they can still remember things that are most important to them. Another thing, like I said, I just love how the track goes back between the state of gloom and darkness with the heavier notes to the singing, which sounds a little happier. And at this point, when they kind of interconnect, what do you think?
D4 is not really cool track to me, but I'm pretty sure has a lot of meaning, like unraveling, denial, sadness, you could say, denial, depression. It just goes back and forth, and it's not terrifying. I'm pretty sure they think it's terrifying because it could be because it loops a lot, and it just keeps going higher and higher until it suddenly goes down, and it loops, does the same thing, and probably the patient with Alzheimer's or dementia is worried because denial and depression just switching is very weird to them.
Alright, and now we have our final track of stage 2, D5, The Way Ahead Feels Lonely. This is one of the most famous tracks in the entire album, and it's pretty easy to understand. A lot of people don't really like stage 2 per se, and while I disagree with them, everybody loves this track. It's so sad and depressing, but it's much more than that. Based off the title, it reminds me of a sunset, which is fitting because the sample is Paul Whitman's Sunset from the Grand Canyon Suite. There's a persistent melody throughout this, but about halfway through, it just gets so heavy and loud with just the amount of sadness. The way ahead feels lonely doesn't mean that you're going to be by yourself, per se, but more because you're going to be forgetting people, the only person you'll know is yourself. And eventually, you won't even know who you are anymore. That makes the track so depressing to me. And the way it ends off, it only loops once, and I think that's a really good thing, because you're no longer living in this state of trying to recall memories, but rather a real sense of conclusion. This is it. This is the last moment that the sadness is here, but soon, not having lucidity, that will take over. What do you think?
Best ending to album, but it's a very good ending to album. Like you said, it kinda. I was gonna say kinda like what you said, but in a little again like when I said maybe A2 again like a little difference. You can hear I think in the middle of it and you hear these chimes and you hear these just I don't know how to describe it. It's you can hear it just a spoiler. I'm not gonna spoil anything. I'm just saying you could hear it in the first maybe 10 minutes of G1, but it's reversed. That's all I'm gonna say. You can go listen to yourself if you want. But it's a very good track and it's very sad meaning at the same time. In conclusion, this is still a good stage, one of my favorites.
Yeah. I find it hard to think that people don't like stage 2 or stage 5 or whichever stage. All of them are very important because this is more on the emotional side of dementia, where you're past the point of just living in the old age recollecting, but it's also before you lose your awareness. And I think that makes it maybe one of the hardest stages of dementia. So next, I'd like to look at the album art, and it's really interesting. I think I love it even more than stage ones. So here we have a flower pot, but it's much more than a flower pot. It looks very dried out, which is kind of like the flowers here. They do look like they're dying a little. But that's not the only thing. You can also see what seems to be a man and a woman, and they're playfully dancing around a tree, because the flower pot could be like the tree, and the flowers themselves could be like, the leaves. But we don't see their faces. So maybe this is the patient looking at a flower pot, or more so, them trying to recall something beautiful or a good memory, and yet they can't remember everything about it. People also say that it looks like the rib cage of the flower pot, which I don't really understand that well, but that does make sense. The colors in the background also just have such a sense of gloom and darkness, and they all look all dried out. What do you think?
It's very good art, and I did notice something about the flower pot. It's rotting itself, which probably means the brain is starting to rot with more plaque, not advanced, but more plaque building in a brain and some more maybe long-term, short-term memory loss starting to build up in a brain. So maybe the flower pot is just a memory of maybe a flower pot or a vase, most likely a flower pot that's slowly fading away, disintegrating, um, rotting away, and they can't remember because I feel like it just reminds them of the brain and how far they've come, and that not only that the end is near, but it's not going to be happy all the time or be easy, kind of easily understand like in this stage.
Definitely. And that's a good way to put it, that the flower pot, not just the flowers are dying, but also the pot itself, maybe representing that it's not just your memories you're losing, it's losing your entire brain as it's being killed by the disease.
Which probably means it's not that it's not what's in the outside, it's in the inside. Which means the outside is fine, but in the inside, that it's truly what the flower pot represents to me. It's not what's out the inside; it's what the inside. When you have Alzheimer's, you can see a lot of horrifying stuff with Alzheimer's because you would never want to get it.
Yeah. And this is the last thing I have to say about the album art, but another thing it represents to me is denial. You see this pretty picture of a man and woman dancing, and you see these pretty flowers, but when you're not looking at that, you just see just a dying flower pot, just like as the brain dies. And I think that's a really good representative of the denial that comes with the stage.
I don't feel really like they're dancing. I feel more as like maybe it's representing they're trying to look around. Maybe try to look around for something. Maybe try like from the brain, maybe trying to understand what's happening, why he's sad, why the memory loss is happening. Maybe that they're trying to answer the question while the brain is rotting.
Yeah. So, well, that's about it for this video. I'd like to say thank you for joining me once again. And it's really been nice talking about stage 2. Next, we'll be talking about my personal favorite stage, stage 3. I don't want to spoil anything, but it definitely gets worse from here. And if you know the album, well, yeah, you know what's going to happen. But thank you for joining me. And do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, just one more thing. Not spoiling again about stage 4, but I know stage 3 is next, but stage 4 is also some moments in stage 3 are like stage 4, but not as worse.
Yeah. Well.